Now, for the next 3 years, the fighting is going to be in the southern colonies in North and South Carolina, especially. And we're going to see that the Americans are going to lose a lot of battles still, but they keep wearing away the British. The longer the war goes, the more blood, the more treasure the British have to spend. Remember, they have to send their supplies 3,000 miles away. The American populace, more and more the loyalists are leaving, and the American populace is resisting, helping them, giving them food, giving them things to help them. They're under constant resistance. And when they're in their encampments, they're usually pretty safe. It's when they leave. If they leave to carry messages, to carry supplies, that's when the Americans really step up the guerrilla warfare efforts. Remember, guerrilla warfare is hitting your enemy with hit-and-run ambushes to try to wear down your enemy over time. And it's not knocking them out with the big punch, rather with the small, light little jabs that add up over time. To put in another horrible, violent analogy, you're not killing them with an axe. You're killing them with a pair of tweezers. It's death by 1,000 cuts. You're slowly wearing away your opponent, not getting the big hit. And the guy that was the best at doing that was a fellow from South Carolina named Francis Marion, but he was better known as the Swamp Fox. And he is so good with using the local terrain. Getting around a swamp is really difficult to move your troops and supplies. And if you have these people that know the swamps like the back of their hands and are able to attack at any moment, it makes the British pretty edgy. And after 3 years of this, the British commander, Lord Cornwallis, who's one of the smartest military minds on the planet at this point, realizes that the Americans are wearing us out. We need to get fresh troops. We need to get fresh supplies. And he makes a plan to escape towards the James River in Virginia and get new soldiers, new supplies, and continue the war against the Americans. And eventually, he thinks, beat them. Here we see Charles Cornwallis. And Charles Cornwallis in England has a castle. He was born into nobility, pretty much always had servants working for him. He taught military expertise. He wrote novels that were taught in Harvard on how to conduct a war. He is this great military mind, but he definitely has a lot of overconfidence. He's got hubris, if you remember a term from the Greeks when we learned about them. And he really sees the Americans as beneath him. He sees Washington as beneath him. He sees them as a bunch of rebellious peasants. And he knows in due time, him as a superior military mind will prevail. Well, when you think that much of yourself, you often overlook people who are right next to you. Like James Armistead Lafayette. Well, he was just known as James Armistead. That he took the last name Armistead from his slave owner. James Armistead asked to volunteer to serve in the Continental Army. And he quickly rose up the ranks despite the fact that he was a slave serving in the South because of his ability to gather information and intelligence. He was a master spy, a double agent who convinced the South, who convinced the British in the South that he was gathering information on the Americans for them. But when he was really there, he was working and gathering information on Cornwallis and sending it back to the Marquis de Lafayette, who is Washington's right-hand man, the French commander, who was so instrumental in helping us win our independence. A bit of information that he's going to give them is going to lead to a real important battle. And here we see Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. If you ever go down to Charleston, South Carolina, his name is all over the place. He is seen as their favorite son of the American Revolution. So, the French fleet has been alerted by the Marquis de Lafayette, thanks to the information by James Armistead, that Cornwallis is going to the James River to get supplies. They send the French fleet, the whole thing, to make a bottleneck to close up the access to the Chesapeake Bay and James River, where Cornwallis is marching his troops on an area that's essentially a peninsula between two rivers that leads onto the Chesapeake Bay. When Cornwallis gets there, the French fleet's there, not the British troops there. The British ships are supposed to have new troops and new supplies. He goes to turn around, and Washington and Lafayette's forces have blocked him off. He is trapped on that peninsula. There's nowhere to go. Now, he has a huge fortress, a big, huge stone fortress, one of the oldest fortresses that was in America at that time period. Remember, Virginia's where America is born, with Jamestown and Yorktown's right in that area. So he has this big old fortress that can withstand cannon blasts from the ships, and he says, I'm going to wait them out. Well, Cornwallis makes a bad choice there, and the Americans and the French slowly encircle Cornwallis. Night by night, by night by night, they lead nighttime sieges to take these earthen barriers one by one, moving the ring closer. Every barrier they take, they seize Cornwallis's cannons and they turn them on him, blasting him more and more. Cornwallis's troops can't go anywhere, and they start to run out of food. And if you run out of food, you can't fight. And without food and supplies, Cornwallis is forced to surrender. This siege strategy where you surround your opponent and force them to eventually surrender by eventually running out of food. I mean, Cornwallis and his officers were eating rats. That's how bad off they were for food. Yeah, you got a guy who lives in a castle now eating a rat, he's probably going to surrender. And that's what Cornwallis does. And he's so disgraced, Cornwallis, that he won't face Washington in person. He sends his secretary out to give his sword over and the orders of surrender over to Washington. Washington, with a good sense of humor, sends his as well. He decides that, this guy wants to insult me. Nah, he's just too chicken to face the, quote, peasant that faced him. So I always think of Cornwallis as Chicken Cornwallis. Anyway, we're going to see that after losing Yorktown, the British are going to realize they beat us in Yorktown against our best general in a horribly overwhelming way. The French are now providing them with a navy. The Americans just aren't giving up, no matter how much they lose. And they come to terms that the Americans will never knock us out, but we'll never knock them out. This war will continue to go on and on and on, and we have an empire to run. If we don't give up on this war and keep sending our troops and our money into it, it's not just that we could lose America, we could lose our empire. And after it takes 2 years, the Treaty of Paris, which we'll talk about in the next lesson, will be negotiated, and the American independence will finally be recognized. All thanks to a slave who was smart enough to who was able to outsmart an aristocrat. Pretty cool. Here we see George Washington sit in the back, seeing his secretary accept the terms of surrender from Cornwallis. As you can see, the big fortress in the background and the British forces with the white flag of surrender next to the American flag. You can see a who's who of Washington's forces, like Lafayette and one of my faves, and Alexander Hamilton, here watching the British surrender. Not seen, but in the area of Yorktown on the battlefield, one Benedict Arnold. Bad choices. Here you see the Americans taking those earthen embankments remember the artists make this light so you can see it, but usually this was in the dark of night that you're climbing up these sharp wooden spikes up sandy hills. You think running in the sand. Now imagine running up a sand dune while somebody is on top shooting cannons and bayoneting at you. Not easy, but the Americans are able to do it. If you go to Yorktown battlefield today, you can still see they've preserved these earthen barriers really well. So, question to wrap this out. What factors led to the ultimate victory of the Americans at the Battle of Yorktown? And what factors after Yorktown led the British to accept American independence and end the war? Thanks for watching. Remember, I'm going to be posting up work throughout the spring break. It will not be required, but it will be work that you can do to get some extra credit and help out the old project grade, especially if you missed a lot of the assignments to begin with. If it was tough getting started, this could be a good way for you to get caught up and or just to get more knowledge. The last section of your packet on from Friday, last article of it, I'll be doing the lesson on that and posting it tomorrow. But you'll have the whole break to finish that if you like. Thanks again for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful break, and I can't wait to start talking to you guys again soon.